Hello, and welcome to Hope Unabridged. I'm Casey Brennan.
I'm Angie Elkins.
And we are so excited to be with you today. We have a special guest, Lamar Hardwick, who wrote the book, Disability in the Church. And I'm really excited to talk about this subject because it is just so close to my heart. And there are just so many churches that get it all wrong. Yeah. And so I know I'm not a part of one of those churches. I have a wonderful church that we go to. But it's a subject that not a lot of people talk about. So
yeah, it's really something I had not thought a ton about because I don't have any children that have disabilities. Yeah. So to hear and to read his book and to hear about his growing up experience and learning that he had autism. Did he say 36? Was he 36 when he was diagnosed? I think so to learn later in life, it's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And I bet it makes him just a really amazing leader in the church. You know what I mean? Just to be able to be that vulnerable with his congregation. So, well, Lamar Hardwick is a husband, father, pastor, author, and autism advocate. In 2014, after years of silently struggling with social anxiety and sensory processing disorder, among a host of other significant issues, Dr. Hardwick was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, which Asperger's syndrome. He is now affectionately known, and I love this, as the autism pastor. That's actually where you can find him online. And I just love that he calls himself that. I think it's great. And I'm so excited to talk to him today. Lamar, thank you so much for being here today. I have been looking forward to this conversation. I loved your book, Disability in the Church, and it just, it spoke a lot to me. I have a special needs son, and it just really resonated with me. So thank you for writing it. Thank you for being here. And I would love to just kind of hear your story because you were diagnosed later in life. So how did that come to be? Can you kind of share your story with us?
Sure. I think I should probably say, I think I always knew, probably around the age of 7 or 8. I started to realize that there were significant differences between me and my peers. I didn't understand a lot of things. I pretended to understand a lot of things. Things that I later come to realize were things such as body language, social cues, facial expressions, voice intonation, all things that people use to communicate without actually using words. Yeah. So I found myself struggling relationally because I could never quite figure out what people wanted, what people were thinking, why people seemed to be upset with me. I didn't realize that my body language and facial expressions were communicating things that I wasn't aware of. So I always knew. I just didn't have a word for it. Yeah. And then after, you hit middle school, you just start pretending a lot to understand things. But it wasn't until age 36, I ran into what I call a proverbial wall. I was transitioning from being the youth and young adult pastor to being the lead pastor. And I heard a lot of comments from the adults. He walked past me, he didn't speak. He doesn't look very approachable. He looks angry. All things that I had heard as a child, but I was hearing it in adult language. And, I joke with people that, prior to that, I worked primarily with teens and they're all socially awkward. So nobody noticed anything with me. But it wasn't until I started spending more time, preaching and teaching in adult service, where I started to hear those things resurface. And I had a really hard time, to be honest. And so after a while, I had told myself, look, everyone can't be wrong. I've been hearing this my whole life. I don't know what it is, but I'm missing something. So after a series of just very hard encounters with different people in the church, I realized, I need to get some help to figure out what this is. And so I actually had a colleague at the time who, because I was doing my doctorate, we had to ask 7 people who were close to us or worked with us to do an assessment of us. And he wrote, and he was a guy I really respect, and he wrote, Lamar has a difficult time picking up on social cues. Lamar gets laser focused on one task at a time. And his evaluation of me, that was for a class project, literally read like diagnostic criteria.
Wow.
And so I didn't know what a social cue was. I'd never heard that word before. So like most people, when you don't know something, you Google it. And that led me sort of down this path of realizing, oh, there's terms for this. Oh, I didn't realize that all these things were happening around me that I wasn't aware of. So after about a year of doing my own investigation, I was pretty certain I knew what it was. And I approached my wife and said, I think I know what's going on. I think I know what some of our communication challenges are. And so she helped me to find someone who would assess me and diagnose me as an adult. And so in December of 2014, I was officially diagnosed. Although, again, I always knew, and then even a year prior to that, I was pretty certain what it was. I just went after an official diagnosis in December of 2014.
Oh. I have a lot of friends just in the special needs community that kind of fear as their children are like when they're grown up, right? I fear this for my own child as he grows up, that the disabilities are not visible at first glance, like you're talking about. How is that for you now that you know that? Was it kind of just in a complete awakening, and just like did you look back at your life and like what was that for you?
Yeah, so that was December 2014. So we're coming up on 7 years at the end of this year. I'll say the first 2 years were really rough. And I should also say I spent 2 years with the therapist that diagnosed me. After she diagnosed me, I spent 2 years seeing her, my wife and I, because I had to unravel a lot of complicated parts of my history. There was a lot of grief there.
Yeah.
A lot of guilt because I replayed every relationship that went wrong. And somehow I didn't realize why people weren't talking to me anymore, because no one ever gives you a chance to explain yourself, especially as you get older. It gets harder.
Yeah.
Because people have far less grace for you when you're older because they quote unquote think you should know better.
Yeah.
So there are literally relationships that ended that I had no clue why. I didn't know why people were always upset with me, why people didn't think I was a good person, why they said the things that they said about me, all things that I would never do on purpose. But yet it just kept happening to me. So the first 2 years was really just trying to work through the grief and the guilt of how many relationships did I ruin, how many people did I unintentionally upset. And so, my therapist really helped me to work through that. And through that process, I'll say that it actually helped me to learn who I was for the first time. So it's almost like meeting myself for the first time and knowing who I am, not who I thought I was presenting to the world. And that path led to me actually, learning to be okay with it.
Yeah.
Being empowered by it, because now some of the labels that I was given, like weird, weak, defiant, angry, I realized that I didn't have to carry those around anymore, that I can now accurately explain to people how my brain works, how I process the world. And then eventually I was able to help people to understand how to work alongside me and how they can get the best experience that they can get. So it was definitely probably a 3-4 year journey to get into the place where I was okay with it and use that as an opportunity to share with people. Okay, this is who I am. This is how I interact with people. And I would tell people things like, if I look angry, just ask me. Oftentimes I don't know that that's what my face is saying to you.
Yeah.
So it actually forced everyone around me to become better communicators, because we didn't lean on assumptions about how each other felt. So it ended up being a good process for me.
I love that you said people were saying things about you and you thought to yourself, okay, everyone can't be wrong. And I think that is a place that a lot of us need to come to just in our lives in general, to start listening to what people are saying around us or maybe to us. How did you even get to that place where you were willing to like receive outside critique and say, maybe this is something I need to look into?
Yeah, I think it was just coming to the place where, like I said, I hit a proverbial wall. When you grow up and you get bullied, you learn how to do 3 things: deny it, deflect it, defend yourself. And so you spend the majority of your preteen and teen years and early young adult years learning how to perfect those 3 things. So anytime anyone said anything about me, I denied it, I deflected, I defended, because, when you're 13, it's a matter of survival.
Yeah.
By the time you become a young adult and you're in the world and you're working and you realize these things continue to happen, at some point you have to ask a question. And I asked this question in the book. Okay, what do people experience when they experience me?
Hmm.
Because it's not what I think it is. And although I was not fond of the terms and the language that people were using to describe their experiences with me, there were enough of those interactions for me to say, all these people can't just be making it up. Some of them don't even know each other. So it's not some big conspiracy theory
Yeah.
about people who are out to get me. Some of these people don't even know each other, but yet they continue to report these experiences with me that are not the way I thought it went.
Yeah.
And that just made me ask a really tough question. What do people experience when they experience me? And that's a question I challenge everyone to ask themselves, because a lot of times it's not what we think it is. And I think part of the path to growth and maturity is not just having self-awareness, but allowing some of your self-awareness to be shaped by the people who are close to you, who observe your behaviors and your mannerisms, and they are telling you, this is what it's like to be on the other side of you.
Yeah. Right.
And yeah.
Oh, I bet you're a really great leader. Like I just, I admire the fact that you're a lead pastor, and you've taken now, God's kind of has you on this stretch of disability in the church, writing this book.
Mhm.
I just think that's a really beautiful thing. And I think a lot of churches miss that.
Mm.
And one of the things I know our church, the church that we go to, they're awesome. I mean, they are so inclusive of the special needs community. It's one of the reasons why we go there, because we feel safe there. I've
Mhm.
had experiences at other churches where it has not been like that, and it's been terrible. And my son was not welcome. And you kind of, I'm sure you can relate, where you hear the little mumblings in the hallways, and like kind of
Mhm.
like the sideways glances, and you immediately feel like you're not welcome there. Um,
Mhm.
how you mentioned that like many churches just don't ever get to that place, right? Of creating an inclusive environment. You mentioned that in your book. Can you talk a little bit about why do churches miss this mark? Why are they so dismissive of it?
Mhm. Yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons. I think there's still very much a lot of stigma, and a lot of ignorance. And I don't use that term in a bad way. It's just,
Mhm.
I think a lot of people in the faith community, because it's something that we very rarely talk about. It's something that is not always a primary focus. You don't hear a lot of preaching and teaching about it. Um, and so I think a lot of churches is still very much a taboo subject.
Yeah.
And so, because there has been no push from the pulpit, from the leaderships, to learn about these issues, to engage this community, which is largely missing from our churches, it tends not to be something that is a priority. And so I also think, and I say this in the book, because I'm a pastor, I can say this:
Mhm.
almost nothing that happens in our churches happens that's not important to the pastor or the leaders.
Mm.
And so one of the reasons why I wrote the book, and the way I wrote the book, is to try to appeal to both sides, to families, but also to church leaders,
Yeah.
so that they can understand the importance of this. Because, I went to seminary, I did a master's and a doctorate. We never talked about this.
Right.
There were no classes on it. There was no focus on it. The church has focused on a lot of issues over the years, be it, there was a season where leadership was a big thing. There was a season where, the missional church was a big thing. We go through these phases in church circles about things that are important, buzzwords.
Mm.
But disability and special needs has just never been at the forefront. So I think that's one of the reasons why it's so challenging, is that one, is still taboo, and then two, we are producing church leaders who have no knowledge of how to
Yeah.
handle this situation.
Yes.
What would you say to a church leader who might be listening right now, who knows, because is feeling compelled even by what you've said, and is
Mhm.
considering, I need to make this a priority in my church? Where would you tell them to start?
I think one of the things that I discovered is when I disclosed to my church my diagnosis, which was only a few months after. So it was December of 2014. I was
Mm.
officially diagnosed. In March of 2015 is when I disclosed to my church. One of the reasons was because the church was growing and I didn't want anyone to come there and have a bad experience with me and me not know it and them never
Yeah.
come back. Because again, people wouldn't give me a second chance. But I discovered when I disclosed and I was upfront and honest and open, it really pulled back the veil of the stigma and sometimes the shame associated with disability. And it made our church a much safer, much comfortable
Hmm.
place to talk about it
Yeah.
because I began to talk about it a lot. And what I discovered is there were already people in the congregation,
Hmm.
a large number of people who were impacted by some kind of disability or special need, or they're a child, or they're a teenager or a young adult. Some of the people that we wouldn't see we would see them maybe every 4 to 6 weeks. We found out why,
Mm-hmm.
because they had issues that they were too embarrassed to talk about.
Okay.
I had staff members, people who worked for me that I didn't know had
Wow.
a disability. Um, so I would say for pastors, start by chipping away at the shame and the stigma.
Mm.
Talk about it. If you don't feel like you're an expert, bring someone in. But what it did is it opened us up to all the people in our church or on the periphery of our church who had those experiences. Once we were able to identify them, then it was a matter of bringing them to the table and saying, okay, what can we do differently? What can we do to help accommodate your family so
Mm-hmm.
that you don't have to feel like every 6 to 8 weeks you can make it to church, or that you don't have to feel like the reason why your child doesn't come to youth ministry is because they won't fit in. And so I would tell pastors and leaders, start by talking about it, make it
Mm-hmm.
a safe and brave space for people to talk about it, and then identify those people who are already in your congregation or on the periphery and give them a seat at the table to help you start to shape what the future of your church looks like and trying to make it more inclusive.
Mm.
That's good.
I talk about that a lot on here and just how I would just love to hear more vulnerability from the pulpit and just leaders in the church just to stand up and share the brokenness and share tough subjects that nobody wants to talk about. And I think that you're a shining example of that exact thing. And I bet everyone in your congregation just had a collective sigh of relief, just to hear that from you as you walked through that and you were just bold and just sharing it.
Mhm.
That's just a beautiful thing. And I do wish that more leaders would do that.
I love that you said, if you think I'm angry, ask me.
Yeah.
Just ask me.
Right.
Have you ever said yes?
Yeah, well, yeah. That's kind of the thing where, and you've probably heard this, like a lot of people on the autism spectrum tend to be very bluntly honest. And so, people have just gotten used to that with me.
Mhm.
It's also why they like my preaching, because
Oh, okay.
I'm pretty straight down the middle.
Hmm.
You don't have to wonder what I mean. And I tell people, I say what I mean and I mean what I say. You don't ever have to wonder,
Yeah.
what I'm
Yeah.
talking about. It's
Yeah.
very clear.
That's
And I
great.
tend to write that way as well. It's just, this is what I mean. So yeah, there are times where people will ask me that and I'll say, yeah, I am angry, and I'll tell you why. But I think people appreciate the honesty.
Mm.
When you live in a world where, uh, and this is just as instinctive, so I don't want to ever sound like, um, my experience is the right experience, because for people that are considered neurotypical, it's just as instinctive for them to use body language and social cues to communicate. It's not so instinctive for me. But when you live in a world where that happens more often than not, we tend to have a suspicion about everything.
Mm.
And so we don't always even trust when people tell us something because their body is saying something different. I
Right.
don't live in that world. So I just have to tell people exactly what's going on in my head. And then I have to ask them to do the same.
Mhm.
But it's all made us more honest and more vulnerable.
Yeah,
I
that's
love
good.
that.
You talk in the book about building an inclusive culture, and you use
Mhm.
these terms: learning, linking, and leadership. Can you
Mhm.
give us just maybe 3 things we can personally do to create that learning, linking, and leadership culture?
Yeah. So the learning culture, and all this comes from a story that Jesus tells, the parable of the sower.
Yeah.
And I just use that as an analogy. He says the first group and the seed hits the ground. And when he interprets it, he says that the bird steals it, the seed. And he simply, in a nutshell, says that it's because of lack of understanding. So building a learning culture is really creating an opportunity where the church is constantly learning. So, for me, it starts with the pulpit, teaching and preaching about disability, about special needs, about topics that we don't talk about, providing opportunities for the congregation to learn. So have small groups about that topic. If you do Sunday school, one of the things that we did in my previous church, we did a lot of lunch and learns. So after service, we would have lunch for those who were interested in learning and joining the team, the inclusion team. A couple times a year, we would do a breakfast and we get local business sponsored. So we were always doing events to help create learning opportunities, putting out pamphlets, having guest speakers. And eventually it just becomes something that we're constantly learning. So it's not a one-off. This is who we are as a church. We're constantly learning about different ways to reach the community. The linking culture is similar. Jesus talks about the second group. They don't hang around because they don't have roots. One of the things I challenge the church to do is not to make room for families impacted by disability, but help them make roots. And that can be done through what you're already doing. So a lot of churches use small groups as the way that they root people in community and help them become family. And so all I ask people to do is incorporate what you're learning and the learning culture into your groups, but then also create groups that meet real life issues. So it's not just Bible study. We have respite groups. We have, a couple times a year, like when it's back to school, parents may need some help, so that they can go and shop. And so we'll provide respite or, a mother's or father's morning out for special needs children so that you can go shopping for school supplies. Same thing around Christmas, date night. So create groups that meet real life issues, not just groups that throw a bunch of scriptures at them because they know the Bible. They don't need that. They need practical help. Right.
Yeah.
And then the leadership culture is just challenging the church to bring persons with disabilities and special needs and their families into the leadership. I often say that you can understand an organization's commitment to diversity and inclusion by who it allows to lead. And ultimately, if you don't have persons with disabilities who are helping shape the church, you're going to fall short in the end, because the reason why it's not as inclusive as it should be is because we didn't ask them in the first place.
Yeah.
And so if you want to make sure that it stays inclusive, you have to have them in a positions of real, not token leadership, but of real leadership that they can help shape the church and give advice and counsel to the leadership.
That's good.
I love that. Have you, can you share a story or something that maybe somebody has shared with you of just children or even adults that have been unwelcomed in the church because of their disabilities?
Yeah, I actually have a couple in the book. There's one of a guy named Tom, and I, had to get their permission to share. I asked people to submit stories. Here's the thing. Unfortunately, some of them were so heartbreaking, I couldn't even put it in the book.
I
It's like
imagine.
that. It's just terrible. But there's one in particular about a guy named Tom who early in his career wanted to be in ministry like myself, but was told, and this was years ago, was told that he couldn't be in ministry because he had epilepsy. And because of his epilepsy, he was not allowed to drive. And so they used that as an excuse year after year to not ordain him simply because he could not drive.
Wow.
Now, we both know, we all know that the ability to drive should not inform his
Affect your
ability to
preaching.
serve God.
Yeah.
But
Right.
it was heartbreaking because he did it year after year after year after year, and they would always find a reason not to ordain him. And then when it got right to the precipice of him finding a church in a different region, same denomination, he talks about in the story, and it's in the book, that they actually had one of the wealthier members of the church come to the church and say, "If you ordain him, I will stop giving money to the church."
Wow.
Yeah, which is awful. And
That is
it was
awful.
solely based on the fact that he had a disability. So there are many stories like that. Like I said, many that I couldn't even put in the book because they were just so heartbreaking. But that's
Yeah.
just one example.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, we've, like I said before, we've definitely, just even visiting my parents up north, have had some really awful experiences just in the church, just not being equipped for my son, like not knowing how to handle him, just so my husband and I can enjoy a service, and we're, like I said, our church here is amazing. And so we're very spoiled in that they are equipped. So for us to go to a different church and to see that, it was just like whiplash, like, oh, this is what that is. This is the unwelcome part that all my friends have talked about. I also love that you break down the percentages and statistics on the different disabilities and how there's an increased chance of families not attending church that have like certain disabilities. Can you share some of those percentages? Do you know them off the top of your head?
Off the top of my head, no. I know that the largest one though is 84. I think it's 84% chance, 84% increased chance that a family won't attend church if their child or anyone in their family is impacted by autism. And then one that always stuck out to me that's also in the book is that 56% of families report that they'd never even been asked how to include their child or their loved one that has a disability. So those are the two that are the most striking to me, maybe because autism is close to my heart, but also 56% of families are not even asked. So it's one thing to be ignorant of what to do, which a lot of churches are, and I talk about that in the book. Some churches are not going to have all the equipment and things at the beginning, but to not even ask, to me, is a whole other issue, is because it just shows that there's no intention on even trying to be inclusive. At least ask the family, what should we know? What do we need to do?
Yeah. So, well, we've loved this conversation.
Yes.
Our show is called Hope Unabridged because we love to have hopeful conversations. And we also love to ask all of our guests this final question. Where are you finding hope these days?
I am finding hope, particularly in this topic. I really feel like, if you know the story of the Pool of Bethesda, where the legend is that the water is being stirred. I'm finding hope in all the challenges that we've had with the pandemic, that God is actually stirring the waters. Because when accessibility became an issue for everyone in the church found a way to get better at providing services. And so
That's a great
I'm
point.
finding hope that God is stirring the waters, and that this time it's not just to heal disabled bodies, it's to heal the disability community's faith in the church. And I think that that's going to happen. I think we're learning where we've fallen short as a church. We're learning that we can do it. We can provide accessibility because we've all had to, because no one was able to access the building. Right. And I'm hopeful that we'll learn from that lesson and we'll carry it on from here, and we'll heal the disability and special needs community's faith will be healed in the church, and they'll be able to be included in the future.
Yes, I love that.
That's great. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today on Hope Unabridged. We'd like to remind you, if you're watching us on Good Life 45, you can also listen to these episodes everywhere you listen to podcasts.
If you're listening and you would like to see the filmed version of this show or any of our other shows, check us out on Good Life 45 or on our YouTube channel and our app.
We hope that something you've heard today really blessed you, and we would love for you to share the show with those you love. Just hit that share button on your podcast app or on YouTube and send it to a friend. And we would also love it if you would leave a review. With this program, we are finding hope in the unedited stories of our lives, and we want you to do the same.